to government class. In today's government class, we'll be looking at some of the importance or merits or achievements of Clifford Constitution. The Clifford Constitution introduced for the first time an elective principle into the country whereby Nigerians were given the right to elect their representatives into the Legislative Council. So this was the constitution that gave Nigerians the right to elect their representatives into the Legislative Council. Previous constitution did not even have anything called an election, but Clifford's constitution was the first constitution that introduced an elective principle into the country and allowed Nigerians to elect their representatives into the Legislative Council. It's also important to know that the elective principle was only for the Legislative Council, and the elective principle brought about limited suffrage. Limited suffrage is a situation, or limited franchise is a situation whereby not every adult citizen, male and female, can vote. So only those that were living in Lagos and Calabar and people that had an income of £100 could vote and be voted for into the Legislative Council. So it was Clifford's Constitution that introduced elective principle and gave Nigerians the right to elect their representatives into the Legislative Council. Another important or achievement of Clifford's Constitution is the Constitution seemed to be the first comprehensive constitution to be introduced in the country. So before the Clifford's Constitution, we had Lord Lugard's Constitution, which was called the Nigerian Council. But this seemed, and when I talked during the class, when I looked at the Nigerian Council, when we looked at the class, please check our previous videos to know more on the class of Nigerian Council. When we looked at Nigerian Council, I said that it is not a real constitution, but it was something that looked similar to a constitution, but it was not like a real constitution. So it was Clifford's Constitution that looked like a constitution, and it was the first comprehensive constitution to be introduced in the country. The Constitution created the path towards the creation of favorable environment for political activities in the country. So it was Clifford's Constitution that created the path towards the creation of a favorable environment for political activities in the country. So it allowed people to form political parties. It allowed people to be more involved in politics. So it created the path towards the creation of a favorable environment for political activities in the country. Another achievement of Clifford's Constitution is it increased the rate at which Nigerians were represented in the Legislative Council. It increased the rate at which Nigerians were represented at the Legislative Council. So previously, before Clifford's Constitution, Nigerians were not really represented in the Legislative Council. It was more Europeans, less Nigerians. So for the first time, it was Clifford's Constitution that increased the rate at which Nigerians were represented in the Legislative Council. The Constitution also gave chance towards the establishment of newspapers in the country. Clifford's Constitution allowed for the establishment of newspapers in the country, and we had newspapers like the West African Pilot and the Lagos Daily News. So it allowed for the establishment of newspapers in the country. The Clifford Constitution also prepared a realistic ground for which Nigerians worked towards self-government. So Clifford's Constitution gave a realistic ground for which Nigerians could work towards self-government, for which Nigerians could work towards their own independence. And with this, we've come to the end of this class. In the course of this class, we looked at some of the important or the achievements of the Clifford Constitution, and some of the important points we talked about was the introduction of an elective principle, the creation of favorable environment for political activities. It gave chance towards the establishment of newspapers in Nigeria, and it increased the rate at which Nigerians were represented at the Legislative Council. And with this, we've come to the end of the class, and I'll see you at the next class.